The galaxy believed the war had finally ended. For many years, different empires, coalitions, and alliances had fought each other across the stars. Entire worlds had burned, fleets had been lost, and billions of lives had ended in fire. But one day the leaders sat at long tables and signed the papers that promised peace. They shook hands, bowed, and declared that the fighting was over. The galaxy sighed with relief. Trade began again, children went back to school, and soldiers went home. The stars seemed quiet at last. On Earth, Captain Daniel Harris tried to live a simple life. He had been a fleet officer, a man who had commanded ships during the hardest battles of the war. His voice had once carried across a bridge full of crew, giving orders in moments when seconds decided life or death. Now his days were slow. He lived near the coast in a small house made of stone and glass. He would wake up early, watch the sunrise, and walk along the shore. The sound of the waves replaced the sound of engines and weapons. Neighbors greeted him, not with salutes but with friendly smiles. For a while, he convinced himself that the war was truly behind him. In orbit above Earth, Commander Olivia Brooks worked at a small station. The station was not a warship, but a place for research and traffic control. It was quiet most days, filled with scientists, engineers, and young officers fresh out of training. Olivia had once been a sharp strategist during the war. She had helped plan battles that turned the tide against enemies who thought humanity would break. But like Daniel, she had believed it was time to put weapons aside. She took her post at the orbital station as a way to stay useful, but away from bloodshed. When she looked out from the wide observation deck, she saw Earth below, blue and full of life. It gave her hope that peace would last, but peace is a fragile thing. In the shadows of distant space, not everyone accepted the end of the war. Some alien empires had lost too much and wanted revenge. Others believed the humans had grown weak now that their fleets were docked and their weapons were put into storage. They whispered lies to each other, saying Earth could be struck quickly, its colonies seized and its people forced to kneel. In hidden systems, they gathered warships. They built weapons in secret. They told themselves the humans would never rise again. On Earth, life continued. Daniel spent evenings in a small cafe by the harbor, talking with friends about fishing, farming, and weather. He laughed more often than he had in years. He tried not to think about the cold steel of starships or the cries of crew members lost in battle. Olivia, far above, trained young officers in calm, patient lessons. She taught them about star maps, communication codes, and the value of careful planning. She did not mention the dark truths of war. Many of her students had never even seen a battle. They were born in the middle of the old war, but too young to fight. To them, war was only history, yet there were small signs that something was wrong. Supply convoys from outer colonies began to report missing shipments. Merchant ships spoke of strange signals in deep space. A mining outpost near the edge of human territory stopped answering messages. At first, these events were seen as accidents. Ships broke down, signals failed, people shrugged and went on with their lives. But then the reports grew louder. Entire convoys were vanishing. Miners sent one final distress call before going silent forever. The stars beyond the borders of human space no longer felt safe. Daniel heard these stories while sitting in the cafe one night. An old friend from the fleet visited him and whispered that the Navy was watching the situation. Daniel nodded but said little. He wanted to believe it was nothing. He wanted to believe the peace would hold. But inside, a part of him stirred, the part that remembered the rule he had lived by during the war. When humanity is attacked, it always fights back. That was rule number one, though no treaty ever wrote it down. Olivia received coded reports at her station. She read the messages carefully. Disturbances along the border, enemy fleets sighted in hidden channels, warnings of attacks being planned. She shared them with her superiors, who told her not to worry. But Olivia could not ignore the uneasy feeling in her chest. She knew the patterns of war. She knew when a storm was coming. One night, Daniel stood on the shore as the waves crashed harder than usual. He looked at the stars above, remembering faces of those he had lost. He wondered if humanity was ready, if the world had grown too soft during these years of quiet. But then he thought of Olivia, of the young officers she trained, of the millions of people on Earth who had rebuilt their lives after fire and loss. He realized something important. Humanity had not forgotten. It had only rested, and rest was not weakness. Far away, in a system without a name on human maps, a fleet of alien warships prepared to move. Their commanders spoke in harsh voices, convinced the time had come. They would strike the colonies first. They would hit Earth's trade. They would show the humans that peace meant nothing. Their ships glowed with energy, engines burning bright as they turned toward human space. The galaxy thought the war was over. The galaxy thought humanity had grown soft. But soon they would be reminded of rule number 1, and this time the lesson would be burned into the stars. The silence after war was ending. The attack came without warning. A fleet of alien warships appeared at the edge of human space, engines burning bright against the darkness. They did not send a message. They did not give time for talks. Their first strike fell upon a mining colony on the edge of the Perseus sector. The colony had no warships, only transports and freighters. They never stood a chance. Explosions lit the sky as homes and stations were torn apart. The few survivors who escaped sent out desperate calls for help before their signals were silenced. Across human space, the news spread quickly. Panic filled the smaller colonies and fear whispered through the trade routes. Many believed the treaties of peace would protect them, but treaties meant nothing to those who had chosen war. The coalition of alien fleets moved with cold precision, attacking convoys, burning outposts, and striking at the edges of Earth's reach. They believed Earth would stay silent. They believed humanity had grown soft. They believed wrong. Daniel Harris sat in his small coastal home when the call came. His old communicator, one he had locked away, blinked with urgent light. For a moment he stared at it, refusing to believe. Then he answered, and the voice of an admiral filled the room. The admiral spoke with sharp words. Humanity was under attack again. Colonies were falling. The fleet was being recalled. Daniel was no longer retired. He was being ordered back into service. Daniel stood at the window looking at the ocean. The waves seemed to roar louder, as if the earth itself knew what was coming. He had tried to live in peace, but the choice had been taken away. Rule number 1 was alive again, and he would answer its call. He packed the uniform he thought he would never wear again, and within hours a transport ship took him from the coast to orbit, where the Navy waited. On the orbital station, Olivia Brooks already knew. The station had been one of the first targets. Enemy ships had fired on it, testing its defenses. The station had survived, but only barely. Smoke filled some corridors, and crews worked to repair systems. Olivia had guided them through the attack with calm orders, saving hundreds of lives. When the enemy withdrew, thinking the job was done, she stood in the command center with her uniform stained with smoke. She read the incoming reports and felt the weight of the moment. War had returned. The young officers under her command looked shaken. Many had never faced real combat before. They stared at her, waiting for words. Olivia kept her voice steady as she told them the truth. This was no accident, no border dispute. This was war. She reminded them of their duty and of rule number 1. Never let an enemy believe humanity will not fight back. Her words lit something inside them. Fear turned into determination. In the days that followed, the situation grew worse. Alien fleets struck deeper into human space. Outposts vanished. Trade routes collapsed. Refugees poured into safer systems, telling stories of fire and destruction. Every human world felt the fear. Governments argued, wondering if they could reason with the attackers. But the truth was clear. Reason had ended the moment the first colony burned. Daniel was placed on a warship once more. The ship was not new, but its engines were strong and its weapons had been quietly upgraded even during the years of peace. Humanity had never fully disarmed. Somewhere in the back of every leader's mind, they knew peace could break. Daniel stood on the bridge as the crew looked to him for orders. Many of them were young, but their eyes burned with the same fire he remembered from long ago. He reminded them that they carried more than weapons. They carried the will of Earth. They carried the lesson the galaxy seemed to forget. Olivia, now in charge of gathering intelligence, worked night and day. She studied the enemy movements, their strategies, their mistakes. She noticed how the coalition of alien empires did not fully trust each other. Some fought harder than others. Some ships moved slower, as if holding back. She shared these observations with Fleet Command, giving Daniel and others the information they needed to strike back when the time was right. One night, as Daniel's ship patrolled near the border, they received a distress call. A civilian convoy was under attack by enemy raiders. Without hesitation, Daniel gave the order to move. Engines roared and the ship jumped through the stars. When they arrived, they found wreckage everywhere. Enemy warships circled the convoy like vultures. Daniel's ship dropped from hyperspace, weapons ready. He gave the order and fire lit the void. Missiles streaked, lasers burned, and the enemy realized too late that they were no longer hunting the weak. They were facing a human warship commanded by a veteran. The battle was short but brutal. Daniel's crew fought with precision, destroying the raiders one by one. The survivors fled, their ships trailing smoke and fire. The convoy was saved, though many ships were damaged. Grateful voices filled the comms, thanking Daniel and his crew. For the first time since the attacks began, hope returned to the survivors. Meanwhile, Olivia intercepted a message from the enemy. They were planning something larger, something more dangerous. A fleet was gathering to strike at a major human colony, one that held millions of people. If it fell, the morale of the entire human race could collapse. She sent the warning to command, her heart heavy with urgency. Humanity had to act fast or the colony would burn. Daniel's ship, along with others, was ordered to join the defense. The fleet gathered, old warships pulled from docks, new recruits standing beside veterans. They were outnumbered, but they were ready. On the eve of battle, Daniel walked the corridors of his ship, speaking to the crew. He told them the truth. This would not be easy. Many of them might not return. But if they failed, humanity would suffer a blow it could not afford. He reminded them of rule number 1, and they answered with steady voices, ready to fight. As the fleet prepared, Olivia continued to feed them intelligence. She tracked enemy routes, predicted their movements, and uncovered weaknesses. The young officers around her worked tirelessly, inspired by her calm determination. Though she was far from the front lines, she knew her work would save lives. She carried the weight of every decision, every signal she sent. When the enemy fleet finally arrived, the stars burned with fire. Dozens of alien warships moved in formation, confident in their numbers. They believed humanity would break, but they were wrong. Human ships emerged from hyperspace with discipline and fury. The battle began, a storm of light and thunder across the black. Daniel stood tall on his bridge as weapons fired and alarms rang. His voice carried calm orders through the chaos. His crew fought with skill beyond their years, guided by his steady hand. Ship after ship fell, both human and alien, but the line held. Humanity refused to give ground. Across the fleet, Olivia's intelligence gave them the edge. Enemy maneuvers were predicted before they happened. Weak points were struck with deadly timing. Hours passed and the battle raged. Finally, the enemy broke. Their fleet, once proud and confident, shattered under the relentless human defense. Ships fled into the dark, their confidence turned to fear. Humanity had held the line. The colony was safe. As the smoke cleared and the stars grew quiet again, Daniel looked out from the bridge. He knew this was only the beginning. The enemy had tested humanity and paid the price, but more battles were coming. Olivia, watching the data scroll across her screens, knew the same. The war had returned, and the galaxy would once again learn the lesson it had forgotten. The survivors of the battle cheered. For the first time since the attacks began, humanity had not only defended itself but had struck back. Rule number 1 was alive, and soon the galaxy would remember it in full. The enemy believed the first great strike would break humanity's spirit, but instead it only lit the fire stronger. The victory at the colony gave hope to millions across human space. For the first time since the attacks began, people felt they could fight back. The refugees who had lost their homes still carried sorrow, but now they also carried determination. They whispered that Earth had not forgotten how to defend itself. They whispered about rule number 1. Daniel Harris stood on the bridge of his ship as repairs were carried out. The battle had left scars on both the vessel and the crew. Hull plates were scorched and energy cells ran low. The medical bay was full of the wounded, and Daniel knew the cost of their survival. He walked the halls, speaking to the crew, offering words of strength. Though tired, their eyes shone with pride. They had defended millions of lives, and they knew they would do it again. Olivia Brooks stayed at her station, surrounded by screens and streams of coded reports. The victory had come because of information, timing, and discipline. She knew this was only the beginning. The enemy would not stop after one defeat. They would gather again, stronger and more united, determined to prove humanity was fragile. Olivia could see their movements already. Fleets shifting, signals crossing, weapons building. She spent sleepless nights tracking them. every detail a puzzle piece in the larger picture of war. Far across the galaxy, the alien coalition gathered in a hidden system. Their commanders argued in cold voices. Some demanded more fleets be sent at once to crush Earth. Others spoke with doubt, shaken by how fast humanity had responded. But greed and revenge pushed them on. They had already spilled blood. There was no turning back. They agreed to strike again, this time at several colonies at once. They believed humanity could not defend them all. Divide and conquer, they said. Break them apart. On Earth, the governments held emergency meetings. Leaders of nations and the fleet command sat in great halls, voices heavy with urgency. Some wanted to seek peace again, to send diplomats and letters, but most knew the truth. There could be no peace until the attackers were stopped. They turned to their admirals and strategists, asking how humanity would survive. The answer was clear: they must strike back, not only defend. They must remind the galaxy why rule number 1 existed. Daniel's ship was repaired enough to return to duty. When the call came, he gathered his crew and told them the mission ahead. They would be part of a strike force moving not to defend, but to take the fight to the enemy. Young officers looked at him with a mix of fear and pride. They had been defenders. Now they would be warriors. Daniel's calm voice steadied them. He told them that fear was natural, but purpose was stronger. Their purpose was simple: protect humanity by teaching the enemy to never attack again. Olivia prepared the plans for the strike. She traced enemy routes, uncovered weak supply lines, and revealed the hidden depots that fed the alien fleets. Every convoy of fuel, every hidden outpost became a target. She sent the coordinates to the strike groups. Her young officers worked tirelessly, their eyes bright with the fire of duty. They understood now that their work shaped the survival of millions. The first mission was a raid on a supply depot deep in enemy space. Daniel's ship was part of the group chosen. They slipped through dark channels, engines low, moving like shadows across the stars. When they arrived, they found the depot guarded but not prepared for a full attack. Daniel gave the order, and human ships struck with precision. Explosions lit the void as fuel tanks and weapon stores went up in flames. Enemy ships scrambled to respond, but they were too slow. The humans were already gone, leaving only wreckage behind. News of the raid spread quickly. Across the galaxy, whispers grew louder. Humanity was not sitting in silence. Humanity was striking back. The alien coalition grew uneasy. Their plan to divide and conquer began to falter. They realized humanity was not only defending colonies but reaching into enemy space itself. Still, the coalition pressed on. They launched attacks against 3 colonies at once, hoping to stretch human fleets too thin. Daniel's ship raced to one of them, arriving just as enemy forces closed in. The battle was fierce, more desperate than before. Civilians scrambled to escape while warships clashed above the planet. Daniel's crew fought with everything they had, but for a time it seemed they might not hold. Then, in the darkest hour, reinforcements arrived. Olivia had intercepted enemy communications and sent urgent signals. 2 more human ships jumped into the fight, tipping the balance. Together, they drove the enemy back, leaving the colony standing. Daniel looked at the world below and knew they had saved millions once again, but he also knew the war was far from over. The coalition grew frustrated. Their commanders shouted at each other, angry that their fleets were being cut apart. Some began to blame each other, suspicion spreading through their fragile alliance. Humanity had found their weakness. They did not trust each other. Olivia saw this clearly in the data. She reported to command that the coalition could be broken if humanity pushed harder. Divide them and they would fall. Earth's leaders agreed. The next phase of the war would not be just defense. It would be disruption. Human fleets were ordered to strike again and again, never giving the enemy time to breathe. Daniel's ship moved from battle to battle, striking convoys, defending colonies, always on the edge of exhaustion. The crew grew weary, but their spirit never broke. Each victory, each life saved, reminded them why they fought. One night, between battles, Daniel stood in his quarters, looking at a photo he kept from years ago. It showed Earth's coast, the waves crashing against rocks, the sky full of light. He thought of home, of peace, of the life he had left behind. He wondered if he would ever return to it. But then he remembered the voices of those who had thanked him, the faces of young officers who looked to him for strength. Peace was not something given. Peace was something fought for. And humanity would fight. Olivia, too, felt the weight of the war. She rarely slept, her mind always on signals and patterns. But when exhaustion threatened, she reminded herself of the children on Earth who slept safely because she did her work. She reminded herself of Daniel, out there in the dark, trusting her information to keep his crew alive. She pressed on because she had no choice. The enemy still believed they could win. They still believed numbers and firepower would crush humanity, but battle by battle, strike by strike, humanity proved them wrong. The galaxy began to watch more closely. Old allies who had once doubted humans began to whisper about joining them again. Neutral worlds began to trade quietly with Earth, offering supplies and support. The tide was slowly turning. The coalition prepared one more great strike, gathering ships from across their fractured alliance. They wanted to end the war in a single blow, but Daniel and Olivia, along with countless others, were ready. Humanity had been tested and it had not broken. The lesson was clear. Rule number 1 was not just words. It was the heart of survival. And the galaxy was beginning to remember it again. The coalition gathered its largest fleet yet. From distant systems, alien warships arrived in great numbers. Their commanders promised their people that this time humanity would be crushed. They said Earth would see fire fall from the sky and that no world could resist such force. In their arrogance, they believed numbers would decide the war. They had not learned that numbers meant little when fighting those who refused to break. Daniel Harris stood on the bridge of his ship, the crew busy at their stations. Reports came in from across human space. Scouts had found the enemy fleet, a storm of ships moving toward a human system with billions of lives. It was not a raid. It was an attempt to destroy everything. The order came from command. All available ships were to gather. It would be the largest human fleet since the old war. Daniel felt the weight of what was coming. He looked around at his young crew, many of them tired but determined. They knew this battle would be different. This was not just about saving one colony or striking one convoy. This was about survival. If they failed, humanity could fall into darkness. He stood tall and spoke to them, reminding them that fear was natural but duty was stronger. He told them to remember rule number 1, never attack humanity and expect mercy. Far away, Olivia Brooks worked without rest. Her intelligence screens glowed with endless streams of data. She tracked the enemy fleet, measuring its size, its routes, and its weaknesses. She noticed how some alien factions in the coalition moved slower, less willing to fight, their loyalty thin. She passed this information to the admirals, who began to shape their plan. Humanity would not fight with brute strength alone. They would fight with strategy, timing, and precision. The fleets gathered near a gas giant at the edge of the targeted system. Dozens of human warships, old and new, formed into groups. Crews worked in silence, checking weapons, charging shields, and sending final messages to families back home. The air was heavy with tension. Daniel stood on his bridge, staring at the stars where the enemy would soon appear. He thought of Earth's coast, of the waves, of peace. He wondered if he would ever see it again, but then he reminded himself that peace would only survive if they won this day. The enemy arrived like a storm. Dozens upon dozens of alien ships dropped out of hyperspace, their engines burning bright. Their formation spread across the system, confident in their power. They believed the humans would scatter. Instead, the human fleet held steady, waiting for the order. Silence filled the comms, then a single voice cut through. Engage. The battle began with thunder. Weapons fired, lighting the void with fire and smoke. Ships twisted and turned, missiles streaked, and shields flared. Daniel's ship moved with deadly precision, striking where Olivia's intelligence had predicted weaknesses. His crew fought with steady hands, each one knowing the fate of millions rested on their shoulders. Enemy ships fell one by one, but the human fleet also suffered heavy losses. The void filled with wreckage, cries, and silence. Olivia watched the battle unfold from her station, her heart pounding with every report. She sent updates to the fleet, guiding them to strike at supply ships and command vessels. She noticed when parts of the enemy formation wavered, their lack of unity showing. She urged the admirals to push at those cracks. Humanity pressed harder, driving the wedge deeper. Hours passed, and still the battle raged. Daniel's ship was struck, alarms blaring, fire spreading through one corridor. He gave calm orders, directing damage control teams while still guiding the fight. His crew followed without hesitation, even as exhaustion set in. They knew their captain would not falter, so neither would they. The coalition's strength was vast, but their unity was weak. One alien faction broke away, retreating into the dark. Then another followed. Fear spread through their lines and suspicion turned to chaos. The once great fleet began to fracture, each group blaming the other for losses. Humanity seized the moment. Coordinated strikes tore through the enemy, breaking their command ships, scattering their forces. Finally, after endless hours of fire and thunder, the enemy fleet collapsed. The survivors fled into hyperspace, leaving wreckage behind. The void grew quiet, filled only with the broken remains of ships humanity had held. Against all odds, they had stood together and broken the largest fleet the coalition could gather. On the bridge, Daniel sank into his chair, exhaustion washing over him. His crew cheered, their faces bright with victory despite the wounds they carried. They had survived, and more importantly, they had proven once again that humanity would not fall. At her station, Olivia let out a long breath, her eyes heavy with fatigue. She had guided the fleet through the fire, and now the reports came in one after another. The system was safe, the enemy was broken. She leaned back, knowing they had won a great battle, but also knowing the war was not finished. Across the galaxy, news of the defeat spread like wildfire. Worlds that had doubted humanity now saw their strength. Neutral powers began to lean toward Earth, offering quiet support. The coalition, once bold, now faced shame and fear. Their people questioned their leaders, asking why they had awakened the wrath of humanity. Doubt spread like cracks through stone. Daniel walked the corridors of his ship, speaking to his crew. He thanked them, honored the ones they had lost, and reminded them why they fought. He told them peace would return, but only if they carried on. The young officers listened closely, their respect for him growing deeper with each word. He was more than a captain. To them, he was a symbol of what it meant to be human. Olivia met with her young officers as well. She praised their tireless work and reminded them that every report, every code, every message had saved lives. They were part of something greater than themselves. She told them the truth. Humanity had survived because everyone did their part. Their faces glowed with pride, knowing they had made a difference. The enemy still lived, scattered and broken, but alive. Daniel and Olivia both knew they would try again, though perhaps with less unity and less strength. Humanity had the advantage now, but the war was not yet done. It would not end until the enemy understood completely what rule number 1 meant. That night, Daniel stood at the window of his quarters, staring at the stars. He thought of the ocean waves back home, the sound of the water, the smell of salt in the air. He promised himself that one day he would return, that one day peace would be more than a memory. But for now, the fight continued. Olivia sat at her desk, exhausted but alert, writing a message to her family on Earth. She told them she was safe, that the fleet had won, and that humanity was strong. She left out the details of fire and loss, but her words carried hope. She wanted them to know that even in the darkest battles, humanity's light still burned bright. The great battle was over, but the war was not. Humanity had reminded the galaxy of rule number 1, and the galaxy would not forget it soon. The galaxy had watched the battle and seen humanity's power. The coalition that had dared to strike first was now scattered and broken. Their fleets were in retreat and their command systems in chaos. Across the stars, fear spread among the alien leaders. They had tested humanity and learned the cost of such arrogance. Daniel Harris stood on the bridge of his ship as messages came from Fleet Command. The orders were clear. Pursue the remaining enemy ships, ensure they could never threaten human space again. It was not revenge, it was survival. Humanity would not give them another chance. The crews, still tired from the last battle, prepared for the final push. Every weapon was checked, shields strengthened, and strategies reviewed. They were ready. Olivia Brooks worked tirelessly from the intelligence hub. She traced enemy routes, noting where ships had fled, where supply lines remained, and which leaders had survived. Every piece of information mattered. She coordinated with Daniel and other fleet commanders to ensure they struck decisively. Her young officers now moved with confidence. Their nerves hardened by battle, but their spirits lifted by each success. They understood their role. Humanity was not just defending itself. It was sending a clear message. The first targets were enemy command worlds, distant planets that had directed attacks against human colonies. Human fleets moved quickly, striking before the enemy could regroup. Battles erupted above these worlds, lasers cutting through dark skies, missiles leaving trails of fire. Daniel's ship led a strike against a heavily fortified command ship orbiting one of these worlds. The engagement was tense. Enemy fire was relentless, but the human crew moved with practiced precision. Each move was calculated, each shot deliberate. The enemy had underestimated them once. They would not underestimate them again. Olivia's intelligence provided crucial guidance. She had intercepted communications revealing weak points in the enemy formation. Daniel adjusted his attack paths accordingly. The command ship took heavy damage, systems failing one by one. With a final coordinated strike, it exploded in a bright flash across space. The enemy fleet around it faltered, confusion spreading like wildfire. Across the galaxy, other human strike groups achieved similar victories. Supply lines were destroyed, defensive installations burned, and enemy ships fell in numbers. The coalition could no longer coordinate. Leaders fled or surrendered. Humanity's response was overwhelming, precise, and swift. They were not merely surviving, they were winning. Daniel watched as the remnants of the enemy fleet attempted to escape. He gave the order to pursue, but carefully. Humanity was not interested in annihilation for its own sake. It wanted to ensure the lesson was learned. Enemy ships were disabled, forced to surrender. Planetary leaders were contacted with clear messages. Humanity would not be attacked again without consequence. The galaxy had finally remembered rule number 1. On Earth, civilians received word of the victories. Relief and celebration spread, but so did caution. Leaders reminded people that the galaxy was still dangerous, that vigilance was necessary. But the fear that had gripped the colonies began to fade. Humanity had proven it would fight, that it would not bow, and that no one could threaten its worlds without facing consequences. Daniel returned to his ship after ensuring the surrender of the last enemy group. He walked the corridors, speaking to his crew, praising their skill and courage. They had faced overwhelming odds and prevailed. He reminded them that they had also protected countless lives, and that every life saved was more valuable than any battle won. The young officers looked at him with admiration. They had seen leadership, courage, and wisdom in action, and it would guide them in years to come. Olivia sat at her station, reviewing the final reports. She sent messages to every human colony, confirming the defeat of the enemy and the safety of their worlds. She updated intelligence files with the lessons learned, ensuring that future generations would understand the importance of vigilance and preparation. Humanity had survived not just because of firepower, but because of planning, intelligence, and the refusal to surrender to fear. The surviving leaders of the alien coalition agreed to a truce. They understood that further attacks would lead only to more destruction. They had been tested and found wanting. Humanity had enforced rule number 1 across the galaxy. They were not to be challenged again. Daniel returned to Earth, stepping onto the familiar shores he had longed to see. The waves crashed against the rocks, and the wind carried the scent of salt and life. He looked out at the horizon, knowing that humanity had survived a great trial. He thought of Olivia, of the young officers, of the countless people who had worked tirelessly to defend and protect their worlds. The galaxy had seen the strength of humanity, and the lesson would not be forgotten. Olivia watched Earth from her orbital station, a sense of calm settling over her. The work was not over, but a great chapter had ended. Humanity had reminded the universe why rule number 1 existed. They had proven that peace would not mean weakness and that survival required courage, wisdom, and unity. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Humanity stood victorious not as conquerors, but as guardians of their own destiny. The stars were once again quiet, but now the quiet was filled with respect, a knowledge that humanity could never be underestimated. Rule number 1 had been enforced, and the memory of that lesson would guide the galaxy for generations to come. Daniel and Olivia, though weary, knew that humanity would continue to grow stronger. They had faced the storm and emerged unbroken. The war had reminded the galaxy that to challenge humanity was to invite consequences beyond imagination. The universe had learned at last that some lessons are written in fire and endurance, and some laws, like rule number 1, are never to be forgotten.